I had no idea how dangerous. And just like that, Abe was gone.
This man was Abe, and he was a powerful and respected gangster boss who was feared across the city. But behind his merciless appearance, Abe was a family man. He had a lovely wife and a daughter he loved so much. Every morning, his daughter would wake him up from bed while his wife would prepare his breakfast and a cup of coffee. For him, these simple moments were his escape from his dark underworld of gangster life. And that morning, it was the same as before. His home was filled with happiness, the complete opposite of his life as a crime boss. While they had breakfast, his daughter asked permission to go to her grandmother's house with her mother. Abe agreed, but only on one condition. His daughter had to finish her homework first, then she could go. His daughter happily accepted the condition and continued with her breakfast. Shortly after, Abe checked his watch and noticed that his personal driver was waiting outside. He then told his wife that he had to leave a bit early that day. He then kissed his wife and left. As soon as Abe left, his wife realized that her husband had forgotten his medication that he was supposed to take that morning, but lately he had sometimes forgotten to take it. It was revealed that Abe had suffered from some mental illness, and he had to take his medication to suppress his mental illness from relapsing. Meanwhile, outside, his personal driver, a man named Benny, was already waiting, ready to drive him wherever he asked. Upon seeing his boss, Benny simply put out his cigarette, then accepted a cup of coffee that his boss gave him. They then got into the car and started driving through the city streets. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to them, they were followed by a police car. Shortly after, Benny realized that they had someone tailing them. He glanced into the rearview mirror and told Abe that a police car was tailing them. Abe asked how he could know that it was a police car. Benny simply explained that being a professional driver had its perks. He said that just by looking at the way someone drives, he could know what the person's intention was. He was so sure that the car following them was really a police car. And Abe, believing what his driver told him, suddenly challenged him to show his skills by escaping the pursuit. Upon hearing that, Benny immediately floored the gas and easily escaped the police pursuit. Once they escaped the police, Benny asked where they were heading. Abe told him that they were going to meet a man named Frankie to settle an issue. He then explained that, as fellow gangster leaders, both he and Frankie had made a truce and split the area of the city for each of them, where Frankie would handle the southern side of the city while Abe controlled the east side. However, Frankie had recently violated that agreement and started messing up in his territory. So he was about to settle the score and warned Frankie not to cause any more trouble. After explaining that, Abe tried to contact a man named Richard, a man known as a financial consultant for criminals and a money launderer. Some time ago, Abe had entrusted a large sum of money for him to launder, yet there was no progress from him. But when Abe called him, he simply rejected the call. This was enough to anger him. Shortly after, Abe asked Benny to pull the car over. When they stopped, Abe met a man and handed him an envelope. He then told the man to visit an apartment at an exact time and deliver the envelope there. The man nodded to the order and immediately left. Somewhere else, a big muscular man named Kane was busy training with a punching bag. People knew him as a harsh, brutal, and merciless figure, and his life depicted that as clear as day. He worked as a paid hitman. His work was brutal and effective. That day, after a long training session, Kane stopped at a convenience store to grab a drink. However, as he turned around to pay for his item, two tattooed men stared at him with challenging looks, clearly looking for trouble. Kane felt his blood start to boil, and he quickly attacked the two. But it turned out that all of it was nothing more than a simulation in his head. He had noticed two police officers near them, and he knew very well not to mess with them, so he refrained from the fight and simply walked away. Shortly after, Kane arrived at his apartment building. However, when he tried to enter the building, a man stood right in his way and clearly tried to block him. Their gazes locked, and Kane was ready to start a fight. But then a woman told the man to move. As Kane walked away, his eyes met the woman's, but neither of them said anything. Kane then went into his apartment and headed straight for a shower. Somewhere else, the man who received the envelope from Abe earlier was preparing to carry out his task. He soon arrived at an apartment, which turned out to be Kane's apartment, at the exact time Abe told him. He then knocked on the door and slid the envelope under the door crack. Soon after, Kane, who had just finished showering, saw the envelope, picked it up, and opened it. Inside, he found a photo of Richard, the man who had previously refused to answer Abe's call, and knew that it was a new mission for him. Without wasting time, he immediately prepared to carry out the mission. At the same time, Richard had just returned home. At that moment, he received a call from an unknown number and thought it was a call from his client, so he rejected the call and went straight for a shower. While Richard was in the shower, his phone started ringing again. This time, his wife saw the incoming message and saw a message from someone called Lollipop. Upon reading it, she finally realized that her husband was having an affair, but she didn't bring it up when Richard showed up. Richard then said that he had an important meeting that day and told his wife not to wait for him, as he would most likely return home the very next day. However, unknown to him, his wife had found out about his betrayal and knew for sure that his meeting was simply a cover-up story. She just swallowed her anger and let her husband leave. After kissing his wife goodbye, Richard drove off in his car to meet his mistress, but unbeknownst to him, his wife was secretly following him. Inside his car, Richard spoke on the phone with the woman he was about to meet. The woman sounded anxious and admitted she felt guilty because she was pregnant and insisted that their relationship was a huge mistake. She was afraid that if Richard's wife found out about it, their relationship would end. However, Richard tried to calm her down, saying that she was overthinking things and reassured her that his wife would never know anything. On the other hand, Richard's wife, who had been following her husband's car all along, began to shed tears. She felt betrayed, devastated, and completely crushed. She couldn't hold it anymore and finally decided to call her sister Kelly to pour her heart out. Fortunately, after trying to call her a few times, Kelly finally picked up. With a trembling voice, Richard's wife revealed that her husband was cheating and was currently on his way to meet the other woman. She also confessed that she was pregnant and could no longer bear living with the man who had betrayed her. Upon hearing that, Kelly tried to calm her sister down and told her not to rush to a conclusion. Shortly after, back at Richard's car, he finally spoke with his mistress, and it was finally revealed that his mistress was no other than Kelly herself, the sister of his own wife. Kelly told him that everything was over because her sister had found out about their affairs, and because of that, they should not see each other again. After saying all that, Kelly ended the call. After the call, Richard was clearly mad. He threw his phone and swerved his car into a parking lot. His mind was filled with thoughts, and he suspected that his wife might be following him. As Richard stepped out of his car in the parking lot, he saw Kane standing directly in front of him. Kane then approached him with a gun pointed right at his head. At that moment, Richard instantly realized this was his end. However, just as Kane pulled the trigger, Richard managed to slap his hand and avoid the bullet. Unfortunately, the bullet ricocheted and hit his wife, who had just arrived, right on her head, killing him instantly. Upon seeing this, Kane was worried because he never intended to kill an innocent person. In his panic, he beat Richard and shot him dead before leaving the scene on his bike. Soon after, Kane stopped at a payphone and immediately tried to call Abe to report the fatal mistake he had just made. However, it was Abe's wife who answered the call, saying that her husband was not home. Kane was left confused and unsure of what to do next. On the other hand, Abe had just arrived at a nightclub with his driver, Benny. This was the location where he was scheduled to meet Frankie. They waited for a while until Frankie finally showed up with his brother, Tony. Abe extended his hand for a handshake, but Frankie refused to take it, and instead he greeted Abe by hugging him and pretending to be friendly. Suddenly, Tony mocked Abe and tried to test his patience, but Abe managed to keep his demeanor. Abe then looked at Frankie and got straight to the point, mentioning how Frankie had caused some trouble in his territory and violated their agreement. However, despite facing his rival gangster leader, Frankie didn't show the slightest respect and just smiled without saying anything in reply. Instead, he took a chessboard and suggested they should settle their business over a game of chess. Abe was surprised and asked why he wanted to play chess. Frankie then explained that they would put their territory on the line. He then added that Abe would have to completely disappear from their dealings. Upon hearing that, Abe replied that he wasn't going to play for such small stakes. He said that if he was going to play chess, he wanted something big as the wager. Frankie then stared at him and asked what could possibly be bigger than wagering their territories. So Abe replied that if he won, he would kill Frankie, and if Frankie won, then Frankie would have to kill him, meaning their lives would be the stakes. He then urged Frankie to start the game immediately. Frankie was clearly furious upon hearing this challenge. He accused Abe of being insane for staking a life on a game of chess and outright refused, saying he would never bet his life for a mere game of chess. He then turned and was about to leave with his brother when Abe's men quickly stopped them and forced them back into their seats. Frankie grew even more furious and suddenly said that he had prepared something should something like this happen. He had anticipated that Abe might try something to harm him, so before the meeting, he had sent his men to Abe's house. He then threatened that if anything happened to him, his men would shoot Abe's entire family dead. However, Abe didn't show the slightest fear. He believed that Frankie could never harm his family. To be challenged like that, Frankie confidently replied that he actually could. Hearing this, Abe instructed him to call his men, and Frankie did exactly that, proving that he wasn't bluffing. Once the call connected, Frankie's men answered, and Frankie smiled, ordering them to enter Abe's house so Abe himself could personally hear his wife scream in horror as they massacred them. The subordinates then entered the house in silence, but after searching the entire house, they couldn't find anyone. They eventually spotted a large box in the middle of one of the rooms and informed Frankie of the discovery. But as soon as the box was opened, a massive explosion instantly occurred, killing all of Frankie's men on the spot.
There's no furniture, no people.
It turned out that Abe had anticipated such a thing would happen, so he had prepared this trap since morning. Now all of Frankie's men were dead, meaning he had no choice but to comply. Abe then explained that Frankie's only chance to stay alive was to play and win the game of chess, though eventually he would ultimately die regardless of the outcome. Finally, the game started, and Frankie, with no other choice, reluctantly joined in. The game proceeded slowly, and despite his confidence at the beginning, Abe made some mistakes that put him at a disadvantage. Thanks to his mistake of not taking his pills in the morning, his mental condition began to destabilize. He showed strange behavior and lost control of his mind. Frankie, on the other hand, was playing very carefully, as he knew his life was at stake. As the game progressed even further, Abe became increasingly unstable and unable to make the correct decisions. One by one, he made some mistakes, and he eventually lost the game. Frankie, who had successfully won, could not believe he had actually defeated Abe. He laughed loudly while insulting Abe for his defeat. However, that action triggered something he didn't expect. Abe suddenly pulled out his pistol and shot Tony in the head without hesitation. He then began cursing and screaming at Frankie and everyone around him. Everyone started to panic and felt that the person they were looking at was no longer the Abe they knew, but someone completely different. On the other hand, Abe had lost it. He screamed and questioned his right-hand man about how many people he had killed. The man replied that he had killed so many people he never even bothered to count. Upon hearing that answer, Abe instantly shot him in the neck. That gunshot caused a full-on commotion, but Abe moved faster, shooting everyone down one by one without any fear. Benny, the driver, stood there witnessing the entire incident. He realized that Abe had gone mad and was completely out of control. As the fight happened, Kane suddenly showed up and caused pure chaos. He was even more brutal than Abe. Benny could only stand in shock, watching it all unfold. Kane shoved his pistol into Frankie's mouth and forced him to apologize. However, Frankie couldn't utter a single word, of course, because of the pistol in his mouth. Kane then pulled the trigger and shot Frankie dead. In the end, only two people remained there, namely Kane and Benny. After killing Frankie, Kane approached Benny and ordered him to take his gun, but Benny refused to comply, enraging Kane. He was beaten and got a gun shoved into his hand. He then stood up while pointing his gun at Kane. Kane said that he would count to 3, and after that, Benny had to shoot him, but if Benny failed, then he would shoot him instead. Benny was clearly panicked to be positioned in that situation. It was at that very moment that the truth was finally revealed. Kane was none other than Abe himself. It turned out that Abe suffered from dissociative identity disorder. In his regular life, he appeared calm, but when it came time to kill someone, the sadistic Kane personality always took over his body. He had lived like this for years, believing that Kane was someone else. Every day at the exact same time, Abe would transition into Kane. The two personalities had never clashed thanks to his medication. However, because he had forgotten to take them several times, Kane's personality eventually took control of his body permanently. It was no longer Abe controlling the body, but Kane. Benny could only stare, unsure of what to do anymore. He had worked for Abe for a long time, but over the last few days he began to realize that his boss was messed up in the head. Abe pressed his gun against his Benny, and at this point Benny understood that if he didn't shoot first, Abe would surely kill him. So just as Abe began the count to 3, Benny pulled the trigger and the bullet went straight through Abe's head, dropping him to the ground, ending his lunacy once and for all.